I have to force myself to take one. I actually figured it out. I have to do your that I didn't have something.
It's food, Dolly. The only thing I can't hear. So we're thinking about having what they call I'll eat something every morning.
I love it.
I used to live free. I used to eat it all the time, but I got where I couldn't eat it. So I just all of them.
All right, guys, let's go ahead and get started. You guys realize this is the next to last class? Yes. I can't even believe this. A couple of housekeeping things. Chris and Josh are going to be over in the pastoral offices at lunch today. And they have a camera set up. And if any of you guys would be willing to say, hey, this is what certified lay ministry has meant to me during this process, I would love for us to capture some stories, some brief stories. You know, we don't need the half an hour, 30-minute version, but brief stories, you know, like a minute or less, just with saying what certified lay ministry has been for you, what this process has been like for you, and what this class has meant to you. Because what we'd like to do is celebrate this inaugural class during annual conference this year, and be able to kind of play a video that just says, hey, this is what it is. Because as you guys have discovered through this process, not a lot of people know what it is, okay? And so you guys can help tell people exactly what it is, and help other people see how they might benefit from it. Okay, so if you are willing to just kind of give a small little statement, a couple sentences of what CLM has meant to you, then during lunch we'll take you guys over to the pastoral offices, and you can film with them. Okay. I have some of my books and resources over here. Thank you, Andy, for encouraging me. The new book that I wrote, I have a couple of copies over there if you guys would like to get it without having to pay shipping and all of that kind of stuff, and you can have it immediately. Some of the other resources that are over there are some other resources that I wrote several years ago that I take to trainings with me and stuff like that. And I'm just clearing out my attic. So some of you guys have already snatched up the only copy of different things over there. So, but there are a few more over there, and those are all just $5 just to help me get them out of my attic. So you guys are helping me out on that. But if you're interested in those, then just let me know on the break, and we can settle up and figure out what that is. Okay?
We're just getting hand-me-down.
That's it. That's it. The best for you. The best for you. The hand-me-downs and the newest.
Will you autograph them?
I will write you a note. I don't like, for whatever reason, I just don't like to sign my name to a book because I feel like these are not my ideas. So then signing my name to a book that I don't know. You know, it's one of those things when you're a writer and you're writing and ideas come to you and you're like, thank you, God, you are so smart. Like, it's not me. So then if I sign my name to it, then I feel like I own it when I don't really own it. These are God's ideas, and he says, hey, use this and write it down and let everybody else benefit from it.
You know what you could do?
What?
Right in there, I give God all the honor and glory.
That's it. So I will write you guys a note if you would like me to write you a note. How about that? All right, so we're going to get started in just a minute. So today we have Debbie Hudgens with us, and she is from Savannah at White Bluff United Methodist Church. And Debbie and I just met a couple of months ago. Actually, she is a movie star, so she's the one that you need to get to autograph something, because she was in the conference video on all those 3 plans of the way forward. Guaranteed that you guys have seen that probably. So she is the movie star that just killed that video. So if you guys want to get her autograph, bring her an index card and she'll sign it for you. And in addition to being famous, Debbie also is a lay leader at White Bluff United Methodist Church and has really helped them lead through some change and transition in the last year, a year and a half. And she has been that resource to some other congregations as well. So today we're talking about congregational culture. We're talking about change and transitions. And Debbie's going to be here to share with you guys a little bit about what she knows about that. And she has some great tools for us to use and to take with us. And so I think that you guys will like getting to know Debbie today. All right, so enough of all of the details of things. Let's get on with what we came here for today. So today we're going to get started with a little activity. Imagine that. You guys have some cards on your table, okay? And what I'd like for you guys to do is each pick 2 cards, okay? Choose 2 cards. Just doesn't even matter which ones, just choose 2. And then I'm going to give you guys some directions. So everybody choose 2 cards.
Essentially what you need.
Is there a reason why you didn't go on?
I got the vote. Okay.
Mine was long.
All right, so here's what I want you guys to do with your 2 cards, okay?
Okay.
And if any of these are inappropriate, I'm sorry, I did not preview them.
Is yours inappropriate?
Okay, so here's what I want you guys to do. You guys are going to create a new business that does both of these things, is a merger of these 2 businesses, okay? And here's what I want you guys to do, okay? The first thing you're going to do, which you'll need an index card for this, the first thing that you're going to do is write the name of your business on an index card, okay? Name of your business. So whatever it is, like if you have a dry cleaner aquarium, maybe it's like a drive-through dry cleaner with you drive through an aquarium, and maybe the business name is Wet and Dry or whatever it is. So you would write your business name up top. And they give you all of these great suggestions of words, so that'll kind of prompt your thinking. And then what I want you guys to do, and I'll give you 5 minutes to do this, okay? Your business name, and then I want you to list 3 core values of that business that would be really, really important, okay? So for instance, maybe clean clothes quick would be a core value of the aquarium dry cleaner, okay? Because that's what's really, really important to you, okay? So think of 3 core values, 3 things that are vitally important to the success of your business and a name, all right? Go.
Be mad if I don't give her a snack this morning. You got to set the example, not throwing this stuff away.
All right, one more minute.
Mine was long, right? There, that was the other one I picked up. Oh, Lord of mercy. You guys got all the good ones.
All right, so here's what I want you guys to do. Share with the people at your table what your business name is and what your 3 core values are. And if you're stuck, then allow other people at your table to kind of speak into that and kind of suggest some core values, okay? So go ahead and share with people at your table. Go ahead.
Mine is called Baby Bell.
I got
You're not right. You're not right.
All right, so let me ask you guys another question. That was a fun way for us to identify some core values that we would want to put into a new business. And you guys are really creative, by the way. I'm very impressed with your creativity. Here's my question to you. What would you say are your core values at your church, in your congregation, in your small group, in your ministry? What are your core values? I think what's interesting is sometimes we may not think we have any, but you have core values.
Oh, yeah.
You have values by which you operate. You have core truths that you believe, and these influence your culture, and it influences the decisions that you make. And it determines almost to a big extent your direction and how you choose to move and how you choose to operate as an organization. So what would you say are your core values? Now, some of you guys can say, hey, this is what I want it to be, but this is what it is. So you may have core values that you would like to see, and then you may have core values that actually sum up the reality of how you make decisions and operate. So talk about that with the people at your table. What would you say are your core values, and what, if they're not what you would like them to be, then what would you like them to be? So talk about that. It is, yeah, what's the name of it? I can't remember what the name of it is. I don't ever play the games the way that
Yeah.
say. It's some sort
With no ministry.
Maybe in the future.
Yeah, so future church outside.
And then what you got to do, you got to put all of it together. Yeah. What they do, you with you come up with what's back then, it doesn't matter what you have. So they you have I ran a red line out, knocked him, here's Kingdom Come. Well, I thought it was like
You tried, I mean, that's what's.
Oh, right. I would say that the core Hey, Josh. All right. What was that process like for you to think about your core values? Is that something that you've ever thought about? Is that kind of a new thought for you, or is that, oh yeah, I know exactly what our core values are and what I hope them to be?
I don't think I've ever tried to put a word to it.
Mm.
Like, I've never stopped to think. And I felt it, but I've never identified it.
Yeah. And one of the things that is interesting is a lot of us, we have this intuitive nature of what's important and what are our core values. But if we don't stop to name it, we're one decision away from losing it. So if it's something that, hey, I really, really love the feel, I really, really love what's important to us, and all of that is great if you're in a really great spot. But if you don't name it and you're not intentional about keeping it that way, and you don't know how you are doing this or why you are doing this, then you're one decision away from moving away from that because you're just unaware. You don't know how you got there, and you don't know what is important to you and what makes it up. And then I think for others of you, you might be in the situation where the gap between where you are and the gap between where you want to be is so big that you're like, what do I do with that gap? Well, that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Because that gap is called growth between where you are and where you want to be. That's where the growth happens. And anytime you experience growth, there is going to be change. And do you guys know that change is not a 4-letter word? It's not. It's not a bad, scary word. It's actually that process of moving from where we are to where God is calling us to be. And that's a normal process. Even for those of us who are in a situation where our core values match where we want to be, there's always someplace else to grow. Always somehow, some way to go deeper. And so there's always a gap. And that gap that's the growth that we need to do. That's the change that needs to happen. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about our culture, because we all have a congregational culture. We all have core values that are true for where we are today. And our history has gotten us to that point, but our history doesn't have to determine where and how we operate in the future. So our history is our history. History informs our decision, but doesn't determine our direction. And so today we're going to talk about congregational culture. We're going to talk about those core values that are important. We're going to talk about how we got there, and then we're going to talk about what we do to close the gap to get us to our next step of where God is calling us to be. Whether that is personal growth, whether that is organizational growth, we're going to talk a lot about that as well today. So that's kind of where we're going, is this whole idea of change and growth in the organization. And I don't want anybody to be like, oh my gosh, my people will never change, and so this doesn't apply to me. It applies to all of us. We are all always growing, and we're always learning, and we're always going deeper, and there's always someplace more for us to grow. So Debbie's going to come first and talk a little bit about congregational culture and size.
Miss Annie,
Yes.
do we just turn our homework into you, or?
Oh, homework you guys can put up here next to the computer. Thank you so much. There's a stack up there. If you have a spiritual rule that you need from me, like Shirley did this beautiful one, and I need to scan it. So if you have one that you need for me to make a copy of and give it back to you, then over lunch I'll make sure and scan it so you guys have the original back if you need that. Okay? Thank you for that question. All right, take it away, Debbie.
I'm thrilled to be with y'all this morning. And I'll tell you why. And you'll see something from me later in the day about this, but God created change. When he moved over the darkness, what did he create? Light. Everything that we know as Christians helps us understand that we need to be changing. Is there anybody here today who came on a horse? No. I wouldn't have been able to join you today because my horse wouldn't have gotten here in time. Change is not the issue. Adapting to the change, adjusting to the change, dealing with it mentally is the change. We will do that. The culture of your church will change depending on the size. And we're going to be talking about this morning. In fact, I think there's a slide. We're going to talk about 4 different sizes of church, because the size of your church really does have an impact and influence the culture and the things you're able to do. I mean, you know that. I'm not telling you anything that you don't already understand. But culture is not something that they grow in a lab in a petri dish. Culture is the lifestyle, the behaviors, what's acceptable, what's not, what's normal in your church. All of that makes up a part of the culture. And all organizations, whether it's a church of 50 as a church or a church of 3,050, and we've actually got some 10,000 ones, I think, in the United Methodist Church, not around here, but in some places. All those cultures are impacted in a lot of different ways. But what we're going to talk about first this morning is the size and how size impacts. Question?
Could you please say what you just said about what the culture is, like the different things you just said, so I can write that down?
The different things that impact the lifestyle.
Lifestyle.
Yep, what's considered normal. Beliefs. The beliefs, what the people believe, what y'all were just talking about, just with Ann. What our core values, what are the things that in this church people value? And it's real interesting if you get a group of people together. I love to throw out questions like this to a Sunday school class. What does a Sunday school class value? What's important to you? Because it's amazing, they're different. And they're impacted by size too. A Sunday school class with 5 people is very different to a Sunday school class with 60 people. And that's the same thing we're talking about here. How many people in here are working within a church that's from 3 to 50 people? Quite a few of you. That's a family church. Everything's like a family. You have a couple of matriarchs, maybe some patriarchs that sort of manage everything. Some more than others. Some more than others. The family church is interesting. And everybody loves everybody most of the time. Sometimes they don't. So I hear a lot of chuckles. I know that you understand what we're talking about. The pastor in this church is really like the caregiver or the chaplain, if you will. And then the matriarchs and the patriarchs control everything else. And so you have to know who those people are right away and work with them, or your culture is going to have issues. So some of you are probably pretty good at that. As we move from the 3 to 50 size family church, you come up with what's known as a pastoral church. And this is attendance, not membership. I belong to a church that has 1,000 members. We have maybe 300 there on Sunday. But for whatever reason, the people want to stay a member because then they have the lifestyle stuff. We got a place to get married, a place to baptize the children or the grandchildren, a place to go when we die. Somebody will bury us and they'll do a dinner or a breakfast or whatever we need to help our family. That's really the pastoral church. And the pastor, oh, by the way, I want to go back and look at the family church and share with you the role of the CLM that you see most often in the family church is providing leadership and pointing the church. This is, again, back to the family church. The role of the CLM is pretty much leadership and pointing the church outside itself to the community, because often the family church is about us, you know, because we're all in a family. You think about your own family. We're about what's happening and what's going on with us. And we don't always share everything that's going on with us, with people outside the family. So one of the CLM roles is to help the people to look out to the community, whether it's for outreach or to bring people in or whatever. It's to help as a CLM to focus the people. Remember, the pastor's the chaplain, and the patriarchs and matriarchs are running the church, and the CLM is trying to help get the church focused on outreach, reaching out to the community or working with the community or within the community. So that I forgot to touch on that, and I wanted to. In the pastoral church, it's a little different. The pastor is the gatekeeper and the shepherd. And the pastoral church is from 50 to 150 in attendance on a regular basis. It might vary, you know, on a given Sunday, and it does in most churches. But the pastoral church, the pastor is sort of guiding and shepherding. People matter more than performance in the pastoral church. When you get into the bigger churches, performance sometimes matters more than people, at least to people. But in the pastoral church, the pastor's gatekeeper and shepherd, and performance matters somewhat. It's important. They don't like it if you don't perform, but it's more about people. And when we're talking about change, we're talking about people. And we're going to be seeing all through this day, we're dealing with people.
What do you mean by performance matter? What is
How
that?
you perform, you don't have to be the world. In a big church like a corporate church, you got to have somebody who delivers pretty good sermons to keep people happy. In a family church, we love our pastor. If so, he doesn't have a great day this Sunday, we don't care. God is with him and he's taking care of us, and that's what matters to us. In the corporate church where you got 300 to 3,000 people, if you don't have a great sermon there, you don't have 3,000 people there very often anymore, because they are looking. I belong to pretty close to a corporate church, but it's also a program church. And when our staff parish is asked by the district superintendent when you're making a change, what kind of preacher, he's got to preach. If he's not a good preacher, it doesn't matter what else he does, because half the people here won't come if he can't preach. They're looking for somebody who does this and this and this. So again, in a family church, it's a lot more like family. You know, I might not like what my son does all the time, but Lord knows I love him. I may not always agree with what he says to me or how he treats his wife or his kids, but I love him anyway, and I'm going to help him with it. You know, I'm not going to get rid of him just because I don't like what he said today. Any other questions on that before we move on? Yes, ma'am.
When you say gatekeeper, explain what you mean.
It's somebody who is really trying to keep you in line to make sure you go through the gate for what you're doing. Who else has an idea of what a gatekeeper would be? Somebody who makes sure you don't get off track. You know, when you're working with a team, sometimes you go what I do, I call bunny trail hopping. You know, when we're talking at our table or working together on something and we're focused on that, and then suddenly somebody will say, guess what I heard the other day? And then the whole table starts talking about what you heard the other day. And I call that bunny trail hopping. And people like to go off down the bunny trail. Sometimes you need a gatekeeper who can say, we need to get back to what we were talking about before we waste any more time. This is fun. Let's wait for a break to talk more. That's sort of a gatekeeper. And a pastor at that level, I've never been a pastor, so that's why I was asking if some of you had better descriptions of what a gatekeeper would be.
I would say in terms of decision-making at the pastoral church, the pastor is the gatekeeper of those decisions. I mean, there's not going to be tons of people that are feeling like they're empowered to go off and make big decisions for the organization. It's gonna come through the pastor. So that pastor becomes the gatekeeper, as it should. It's 50 to 150 people. So it's small enough that the pastor still has his hands in all of those things.
Absolutely. That's a great point, Ann. The pastor is charged in the discipline of creating the order within the church. So if you have people just going off willy-nilly doing stuff, there needs to be somebody to say, well, wait a minute, we're not going to move the choir to the end of the service. We're going to leave them where they are, because we all know some people don't like it when you change what you're doing on Sunday morning. If you decide that you're not going to take up the offering till the end, somebody's going to say to you when they're walking out to tell you you had a good sermon or they didn't like it, whichever that would be, they're going to say, oh, by the way, I noticed that you changed the choir to the end and I didn't like that. Or by the way, I noticed you changed the choir to the end and I loved it. Because you got all kinds of people and they got all kinds of opinions. So just be aware, in the pastoral church, the pastor will be gatekeeping, because that helps to create the order and maintain the order within the church, which is the pastor's role, according to the discipline. Belonging and fellowship are real important in a pastoral church. It's about being a part of the church, being a part of the fellowship. The certified minister, certified lay minister, can assist the pastor by helping develop individuals who are willing to take a more active role. So it's about learning to work with people and develop them. And this is real important because most people don't have access to what I call corporate training and leadership development. You may have one or two people in the church who've had access to that, but most people don't unless the church offers it, and you can avail yourself of that. So that's really something that the lay minister can really help with, I think, to empower members to assist and to minister both inside and outside the church, inside and outside. So that's really the pastoral church. The program church, that's 100 to 350. Is it? 150, sorry. Now, I've got one eye that sees far away, and it doesn't always see well far away. It's really a trouble when you're driving down 95. You can't read the signs very well. But anyway, the program church, 150 to 350, I think. The pastor is the chief administrator. If you don't have administrative skills, when you move from a pastoral church and you assume the responsibility of pastoring a program church, you're going to have to really find somebody strong in administration to help you out. Somebody have a question, or you just stretching? Go Dogs. I went to Auburn, so I don't say that much. Enjoy it. That's my husband is Roll Tide. We don't speak during that week of the year when Auburn plays Alabama. Anyway, in the program church, the chief administrator, his main priority is recruiting and equipping leaders. That's a big difference from gatekeeping and shepherding. So you can see that that's a big move for you if you are a CLM and your church goes from being a pastoral church to becoming a program church. People's roles will change. Your role might change, and you may feel more comfortable in one than in the other. I've had, in big churches that I've been in, I've had pastors who were very administratively inclined, and they wanted to manage all the data and do all that. And then I've had pastors who were hands-on, and they wanted to do everything. They didn't want to delegate. But when you get to the program church, you got to have people in the church who can take over and run with the ball. And that's something that's real. That's a big break between those two churches. And you can have one church that's in between both of them. So you're trying to do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So beware of that and be aware that this is when the roles may change for you. Yeah.
I understand what you, but even in, wouldn't it be, this is just a question, I guess, wouldn't it be good to, because that's what I try where I'm at, I don't have a very big church, but I try to find people that, you know, I've asked them, what is your vision? You know, what for the church, for yourself, and for the church, and then, you know, let's see if, and get them involved. I don't want to do it for them, but I want to get them involved. Is that?
That's outstanding. The more people are involved,
Even in the
the
small
more
church?
invested they are in the process. The family church, everybody's invested. In the pastoral church, there may be a few that are heavily invested, maybe more than others. In the program church, your leaders are invested, and sometimes the people that work for them are invested. But you have to work a little harder, because when you got 350 or 400 there on Sunday morning, some people come once a month. Some people come every 2 months. Some people are there every Sunday, and they tend to be the people most invested. When you start changing one of those churches, the people that are most invested are going to suffer loss. Maybe loss of their position, the loss of what they like to do because of somebody else is going to be doing it. And that's when you get into some of the issues we'll talk about later today. As Ann said, we're kind of going to put all this together toward the end of the day. But it's real important, and I love doing that, because in change, you have to involve everybody. The more people, think about the tabernacle in the desert. How hard was it to put that sucker up and take it down every time they moved? And they did that for what, 40-something years. Everybody had to be involved to get it done. Yes, ma'am.
How about if the member don't want to be changed, like they
You're
want,
always going to have those.
how about if they want, they don't want to do anything, they want all the pastor to do everything.
Well,
How are you gonna do that?
What you have to do is really try to encourage them. Find out what their ideas are, is what I do. Find out what they are most passionate about, because people who are passionate about things are more happy to get involved. And you're going to have some people who are not passionate about anything except maybe telling you what you've done wrong. That's a passion. There's some people who that is a core competency. It's what they do best. It's what they do best. And as pastors, you know, I haven't been one, but I've watched them for a lot more years than I care to think about. And they really struggle with that, because there's some people, no matter how good you are, their best thing that they can do is to find the one thing that you weren't good at. And they harp on it, you know, and you just got to love them through it. I think God has a special place in heaven for pastors to have a lot of those kind of folks. Some of those are the ones you wish would leave. You know, God never leaves, but sometimes in our congregation, people do leave, and often it's not bad. And we'll talk about that a little bit this afternoon. The program chart, you get peace and you sleep better at night. In the program church, the people, the leaders move from being doers to being developers and equippers. You know, and that's hard for some leaders. If you're transitioning between a pastoral church and a program church, some people are really hands-on and they want to manage the whole thing, especially if they came from a pastoral and from a family church that grew to a pastoral church, and they were one of the matriarchs or patriarchs. They haven't let go of being in charge of everything. But what happens if they don't let go is you get less and less effective, because as the church gets bigger, again, it influences the culture, and the culture will change, and they're still left trying to manage a culture of a family or a pastoral church, and now they're a program church. And so the pastor has to coach people. And we'll talk and use a tool this afternoon that I have for you about how you coach people to change. And it tells you what the emotion is, what the behavior is, and how you as a leader can coach them. Because I think it's real important for you as leaders in your church, whether you're a pastor or a certified lay minister, to know how to coach people, to be able to identify when they're struggling with letting go and moving ahead, because this is what we're talking about being able to move ahead and grow. A lot of ministries and programs in the program church become avenues for recruiting new people to the church or helping people to change. And that's what you'll do with your coaching activity. Those avenues will become faith-based. You'll be providing maybe some learning programs or some study programs or some things like this where people move from where they were to where they need to be, to where God wants them to be. And you facilitate that process as a leader, which is what's so wonderful about watching church growth. The certified lay minister provides leadership for groups in the program church, helps them maintain common goals and purpose. What begins to happen in a program church is you tend to get away from trying to get away from being more of a pastoral church and trying to provide things that will draw in new people, things that are needs-based. You know, I need to be a better parent, so I need some coaching on that, or I need a program. I need to be a better leader, so I need some developmental stuff, programs that'll help me. I need to have a closer walk with the Lord, so I need a Sunday school class or a small group class that will help me learn to do that, help me to be better at it than I have been before. So in the program church, the CLM can take on a pretty big role, and depending on your own style of leadership, there's a lot to be said for that in this kind of training. Very important. The next level of the church that's influenced by size would make you a corporate church, and that's 350 and up. And the older that church is, the more transition you'll see in there. The newer the church, and a lot of people really invested in it, but the longer you go down the timeline, the more invested they get in what you're doing, and they get really unhappy if you change something. If they're new to the church and you're new to the church and the church is new, you don't get so much of that because you don't have a whole lot of people that don't want to change that. You know, everybody's used to it changing. And we're going to talk a lot about change. I want to do a really quick exercise before we talk about the corporate church and finish up in a second. The certified lay minister in the program church provides leadership for small groups and special ministries. So whatever you do, if you have a passion for a special ministry in your church, or there's one that's already started that you want to see improve and grow, focus on that. If you're in just corporate sized church, we've got some of those. They have a lot of change and transition in those churches, as well as all of the other three, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that. The pastor in the corporate church casts the vision. He's the vision caster. He shares the vision. I would hope that he gets some input from the corporate church, and that's easy to do in one that's got 350 or 375, 400 people, a little harder in the church with 3,000 or 4,000. But usually in a church of 3,000 or 4,000, they've been that way a while. They didn't just get that way in a week or two. And so they've pretty much already got a vision, and they've got some people. You usually have in a corporate church a good many people who are trained in organizational management and leadership. You may have a handful of core leaders who are already good at that. And when you come new to a church like that, they'll tell you what the vision is. Sometimes they even have a posted vision statement or mission statement of what their focus is. The pastor, the only thing he's doing, his priorities is to ensure that everything that happens in the church, the order of the church, the recruitment of the leadership, that everything is aligned with vision. The staff who's hired, what their skill set is, and things they do. It's much more of a corporate running a big corporate deal than it is at the family church level or the pastoral or program church level. In the larger program church level, you might get a mixture of some corporate stuff from a corporate church where you're more of a vision caster, but you may not have as much trained staff, or you may not have as many lay people in your church that are trained in leadership development and HR and the kinds of things that you really need when you get a staff of 5 or 10 people. You need to have some HR expertise and some legal expertise and a lot of things that you don't need back in the family or pastoral churches. But you can have some blend between those two. I want us to go now to an activity. And we're going to talk a little bit about what category your church falls into at your table, what impact the size has had on the cultures and the values of your organization. Anne's got a slide, I think, that will help you out. Before you do that, is everybody wearing a watch? Some people don't wear watches. If you're wearing a watch, I would like for you to move it from the arm it's on and put it on the arm that you don't wear. And we'll talk a little more about that later on in the day. But if you would just do that for me. I have a hard time even getting my watch to hook on my right hand because I don't wear it on that hand. And I'm always afraid I'm going to lose it, but I've got it moved. And that feels absolutely stupid. Okay. All right. Now, we'll talk more about how that feels on your arm later on today. I want y'all to do this, talk at your table about what your congregation currently fits, which one of those 4, and you should have that in your book. You should have the 4 in the page. Yeah, you should have those 4 listed down. So you can talk about what
You said this number is attendance, not membership.
people in attendance. Yeah, because like my church has 1,000 members. So we have but we're in a big city. You know, in a smaller community, you might have a closer relationship with the number of members and the number of attendants. And that's why I say attendance, because in a lot of churches, attendance. In our church, we have a lot of elderly people, a lot of them are assisted living in nursing homes, and they can't make it to church, but they're still involved. They still are, but we're very competitive.
Our church values where what would you That's right. Because that's the shift right there. Exactly. That's good. Okay. So we all right, so ours is, we think the outside of the very
That's right. That's my quarter. You're starting with the. Which I like. What's your?
We got
My house. That's what
I do want to. It's hard to pay for that.
All right, let me ask you guys a question. How many of you would say that you are a part, hey Josh, how many of you guys would say that we have another meeting that normally meets in here, that we moved them this time and they're over in the sanctuary, so they keep coming in here. So we keep sending them over there. That's why I'm sending Josh out the door every 5 minutes. How many of you guys would say that you are a part of a family church? That is your current size. All right. How many of you guys would say that you are a part of a church that is a pastoral sized church? Pastoral church. All right. What about a program church? And then corporate church. Yeah. So
I think our discussion was primarily the fact that we're all part of a chapel. So from the chapel perspective, we're a corporate, but each individual campus, we looked at each individual campus and evaluated those as separate.
Yeah, so for the chapel or for some of the other multi-campus type churches, for me, that's one of the beauties of a multi-campus church is that you have the resources and the ability to operate like a corporate church, but each individual site is smaller. So instead of having this huge, big, massive auditorium with 10,000 people in it, you're able to have small groups of people. So yeah, for the chapel, it's kind of two things at the same time, depending on which campus you're part of. So here's what I want to ask you guys. As you think about where you are, and you think about where you are in your culture, okay, and then you think about where you would like to be, where you would like for your church and your congregation to grow, and where you would like for them to grow not only in numbers, but also in culture and in values. There is some change that needs to happen in order to get from one to the other, correct? And what we're going to talk about in this next section is that there is a change in thinking, there's a change in operating in order to get Josh, somebody else is covered. I know, watch that. Josh is the gatekeeper. So to get from where we are now to where we want to be, there's some change that needs to happen in our systems, in our thinking, and in our leadership as well. So that's what we're going to do in this next section, is kind of talk about what those changes look like and how we need to change in order to close that gap. One of the things that Jay would tell you if he was here is that, he's been at the chapel for, I don't even know, 15 years now. I mean, he started the chapel. And every year you go before the DS, and the DS says, so, where are you now? And how many years have you been there? And how do you like it? And how are things going? And Jay always jokes and says that he goes to the DS every year and he says, yep, first year here. First year here. This is my first year at the chapel, And the reason that he does that is because every time we have grown, every year we have grown, it's a different church. You have to change the way that you do things in order to accommodate and prepare for new growth. Now, did you notice that I said two words, accommodate and prepare? We definitely have to grow and adjust after change happens, but we also have to grow and adjust in order for change to happen. And so today we're going to talk about that transition and what we have to do in order to accommodate growth that happens, and then also to prepare for growth that will happen in the future. And there are a couple of key things that we're going to talk about that is a shift in how we lead and how we approach our churches, okay? So the first one is leadership styles. We need to, as leaders, grow and improve the way that we are leading and move from a doing style to an empowering style. That's exactly what he was talking about, is the fact that a lot of times in a church, especially a smaller church, people say, well, you're the pastor, that's what you do. That's why we have you. It's your job. And exactly, that's what we pay you for. That's your job. But in order to accommodate growth and prepare for growth, as pastors, as leaders, we need to move from this doing mindset and mentality to an empowering mindset and mentality. Now, empowering means that you are giving the power away, okay? There is an element of delegation in that, hey, I'm going to give you all of this stuff. But empowering is a little bit different than delegation, okay? Delegation is, hey, I'm going to give you all of this. Empowering is, I'm going to walk with you through this, and I'm going to help you use the God-given gifts that God created you with in order to do this work that I'm giving you to do. It's not just, here you go, now it's off my plate, and it's on your plate, and it's all you. Okay, sometimes that can be delegation, but that is definitely not empowering to that person. So we need to move from a mindset of doing to empowering. If we are the ones that are doing all of the things, we have capped out our ability to grow. Because a pastor, a leader, can only shepherd so many people. And if it's all up to me, then here's my capacity, and when I reach it, my ministry, my church, my organization cannot grow past my ability if I am the one that does everything. Now, if I am the one that empowers other people to do things, then all of a sudden my capacity has just multiplied. All of a sudden, it's not a leadership, I am not the leadership with, but it is everybody else that's in ministry with me that I am empowering and giving away that power in order to use the gifts that God has created them to do. So moving from doing to empowering. And I know that sometimes that is really difficult if you have a culture that expects you to be the doer. That's why you take it one step at a time and you identify the greatness within the people that are around you in your setting, in your congregation, and you begin to walk with them one step at a time. This empowering process, it doesn't happen overnight. This is a process. And you start with one person and you say, Lori, I see the greatness within you. I see the way God has created you. I want to walk alongside you and help you live that out. And then when you've empowered Lori and she's up and running, then you find the next person. Remember we talked about the Paul and the Timothy? You've got to make sure that you always have that person that you are empowering, that you're bringing along, okay? So we need to move from doing to empowering. The other thing that has to change is organizational structure. If we're going from one place to the next place, the structure and how and our systems need to change in order to prepare for growth, to accommodate and prepare for growth. We need to move from one team to multiple aligned teams. A lot of times what happens in a smaller church is you have a small group of people and they just make the decisions. We make the decisions and we run with it. We make the decisions and we run with it. And that works in a small group. It works for a family church. It works for that pastoral church sometimes. But when you begin to move into that pastoral church and you begin to have complexity where all of a sudden you're making these quick decisions and you're moving forward, and then we realize that we've got some complexity, that we're dropping some balls, that we're not letting people know and they're getting upset, then we need to move to not one team that has all the power, but we need to be able to give away power and responsibility and decision-making to other teams, okay? Now, here's the thing that can happen, though, when you make that transition, is that you can move from this one team to multiple teams and you can say, okay, you get a decision and you get a decision and you get a decision. Now go do your thing. And then they can all be spread out and they can all be making decisions based on their own understanding of the culture and their own understanding of priorities. That's why that word aligned is so, so crucial in there, okay? Because even though you have multiple teams, you're still moving in the same direction. If you're not moving in the same direction, then you are actually competing against yourself. So you have a team over here that's making decisions that contradicts and competes for resources with a team over here that's making decisions. And then all of a sudden, there is this disconnect between your teams. So we need to move from one team making all the decisions to empowering multiple aligned teams that are clear about their decision-making areas, okay? So that means that somebody needs to tell them, here's what you have the responsibility and the power to make a decision about. So be very clear so they understand, oh, this is my area and this is what I can make a decision about. And these are the principles, these are the values. That's why it's so important for us to put words to those values, to make sure that our teams know why we are doing what we're doing and how we want to do it. Because if everybody is aware of those core values, then you know what decisions to make. Because once you know who you are, then you know what to do, okay? So we need multiple aligned teams. Decision-making processes need to change from the key gatekeeper to empowered team leaders. We need to let our team leaders know, hey, these are the decisions that you are empowered to make. Instead of saying, hey, everything comes through me. Because if I am the one that makes all the decisions and holds the keys, then I'm the only one that really knows the values and what's important. And once again, that's that leadership lid. I become the leadership lid. No decision can be made unless I'm a part of it, unless I make it. Then there are decisions that our ministries could be making, but because of my limitations, we're not able to make it. So we need to be very, very clear with our leaders and empower them to make the decisions that they are called to make. Which means that as the main leader, as the ministry leader, that I need to be clearly investing in those people so we make sure that we're operating under those same values and under those same principles. Our relational orientations need to change from whole group to small groups. Here's the thing, not everybody has to be involved in everything. There are some people that are extremely passionate about one thing and other people that are extremely passionate about another thing. And that does not mean that everybody has to be passionate about the same stuff. We need to value and affirm everybody's diverse passions without feeling like I have to be involved in everything. So for those of you that are in a very small church, even if you guys have 2 areas of ministry, let one group be involved in one area of ministry and another group be involved in another area of ministry. And here's the reason. Let's say that I am involved in 3 different areas of ministry in the church, okay? And I have, overall in my schedule, I have 3 hours to give. Well, I'm going to give an hour to this group, and I'm going to give an hour to this group, and I'm going to give an hour to this group. My effectiveness is this much. What if I chose the one thing that I was created for? What if I chose the one thing that God has for me to do, instead of saying, oh, I'm needed at all 3? What if I chose that one thing and I put all 3 of my hours in that direction, which is a direction that I am gifted for, that I'm equipped for, that I'm passionate about? I'm going to get so much more result from fully investing in one ministry area than I will if I have to be the one that is at every single thing. And so I think that in order to make that transition with our people, I think it's important for us to identify the greatness within them and not say, you are not needed at all these things. That's not identifying the greatness. What we need to do is say, hey, I see in you that God has created you and he has fashioned you and he has given you the experience and the passion that you need to really excel in this one area. What would it look like if you devoted all your energy into that one area? And here's the thing, immediately, I know you guys are thinking about, well, if I have, several different people pulling out of these different ministries, who's going to do them? Well, what if you had several different people pulling out of these ministries and investing themselves heavily and fully into one of those ministries? You're going to have ministries that are functioning better and more efficiently and with more heart and passion than you would just warm bodies that need to be there because nobody else can do it like I can do it. So we need to think about the way that we relate to each other in terms of everybody has to do everything, to small groups of people deployed into ministry and doing that work very passionately out of the way that they are created. And finally, the last thing that we have to look at in order to make that transformation is an understanding of mission. An understanding of mission. It's an understanding of why the church exists. Instead of thinking that the church exists to serve me, we need to move to the understanding that the church exists for the world. That there is less of a focus on inward satisfaction and more of a focus on outward outreach. And I know that this is difficult in a smaller congregation. I know this is difficult in a congregation that has been together for a very, very, very long time. But one of the things that Debbie said that I loved is that one of your roles as certified lay ministers in that congregation can be to say, hey, what's the community think about that? What do you think would benefit the people that are not here in this church? You guys have now, I don't know if you've noticed this, but I have noticed a shift in your questions and a shift in your thinking since you guys have been a part of this class. You guys are asking questions that are not about what do I need the church to be for me? You're beginning to ask questions, what does God need the church to be for the world? And you guys have the ability to bring that voice and that perspective into your ministry settings. You have the ability to shift the understanding and the thinking, because I really don't think that people start out to say, oh, I want the church to be all about me and for me. They just don't have a perspective they don't have a mindset of looking outside of themselves. And if you guys are able to be that perspective for them and to ask those questions, then a lot of times people will be like, I've never thought about it that way. And you can bring that perspective into that room and begin to ask those questions that will help shift things from the church is here for me and it's about me to, oh, I understand the church's mission. It is so I can be on mission for the people that are still lost, for the people that have not heard about Jesus. Nick?
That's something that I'm struggling with at our church. So to say it like you just said it seems very, very clear and very simple to me. In your experience, when you try to take people on that walk, you just go right there after it and just say, hey, look, what does God want this to be for the world? Or do you ease them into that conversation?
So curiosity is a very open-handed, beautiful stance. It's a way of approaching really tough situations and really solidified mindsets in a way that is very open and inviting. So in a situation where I know that people just don't see it the way that I see it, or they don't have the same perspective, what I would do is say, I wonder what would it look like if we were a church for the community? What would that look like? Man, I wonder what it would be like if we were this. Or I wonder what the community thinks of when they see us. Always with a mindset of curiosity, because I think a lot of times people know, they just haven't thought about it. And if you help them to say that from a different perspective, then all of a sudden they're able to own it. So anytime you can approach a tough situation with a question that starts, I wonder if whatever, or what would it be like if, or out of curiosity, or I'm just wondering, then all of a sudden it's not, I have a message that you guys need to know and I'm about to preach it to you. Okay? Because that often does not go over well. But if you just wonder and you get people to wonder aloud with you, then all of a sudden, as they wonder aloud and as they take on that perspective, they're able to say the things that you wanted them to know. And then it becomes their reality and it becomes their discovery. And when they own it, they're much, much, much more apt to move forward in that direction and to think about that again. So I would say anytime you can approach it with open hands and wonder and be curious and just throw out some questions that will help them discover for themselves. Any other thoughts about those key shifts that need to happen in moving from one way of operating to the other?
I think sometimes it's also about the leadership developing trust with those underneath. And I don't mean their trust in the leadership. I mean the leadership's trust in those individuals to carry out those missions.
Absolutely.
And therefore giving them the power to make those decisions and things.
Yes. Which is why when you empower someone, you don't just put all the stuff in their basket and then just walk away. Right. That there's this walking beside that needs to happen in order to make sure, hey, you got this? You got this? Because the last thing I want to do if I'm empowering somebody is to give you more than you can handle at the time and for you to totally fail and then walk away from ministry or from leadership because you weren't ready for it or you weren't prepared for it and I didn't do a good enough job doing that. So because you have that relationship, because we're relational leaders and we have that balance. Remember we talked about the balance between relationships and results. There's that beautiful tension along that. Because we value that relationship, we've got to make sure that as we empower, we walk beside. Now, that doesn't mean that we rescue. Sometimes you have to allow people to do things even though you think, I don't know. If they're like, I got this, I got this, I got this, then at some point you just got to say, okay, you got it. So there is a little bit of that where you don't want to come in and rescue, put on your cape, and then say, I'm about to save you from yourself. Because sometimes people, depending on who the person is and how they operate, but sometimes people just have to do it, and then you circle back up with them, and you don't say, hey, I told you so. You know, you say, hey, so I'm wondering, I'm curious, what was that experience like for you? What did we learn? What are the lessons? Because we did learn something, didn't we? I learned something, you learned something, we both learned something. Yes.
Empowering you're talking about, I just want to hear your views on doing that Sunday morning in the pulpit.
Say a little bit more about that, from getting other people to be involved, or
Exactly, empowered.
Mhm.
Because, you know, a lot of times, you can do it one-on-one, you can do it in a group setting.
Mhm.
But not everybody attends the small group.
Mhm.
Sunday morning while you're in the pulpit, you usually get the bulk of your congregation there. Just your view, but I know that's a slippery slope. Your views on that going in the pulpit on Sunday morning.
So are you saying about communicating about empowerment, or are you saying actually empowering Jessica to come and be a part of what is happening, how that she might co-lead with me or something like that during
All
the
of the
message?
above.
So,
And could I?
sure.
Brother, I've been doing that already. And what I've been doing is what she's teaching and talking about, I take that and relate it back to scripture, bring the scripture, and then kind of expand a little bit to where it's not as hard or not as straightforward. But it ties in. If that helps.
I think
I kind of do that already, but I want to hear, because I get empowering, but when you're in a family church, a more traditional based church, you know, they want to hear a sermon on Sunday morning. It has nothing to do with what, you know.
So let me see if this answers your question. Okay. So Chris, I'm gonna pick on you for a little bit. So Chris is at our Grace campus. Okay. One of Chris's people is Hudson. He's a college student here at CCGA. Okay, that's one of his Timothys. Okay, Chris is working with Hudson, and he's empowering Hudson in ministry. Well, this was maybe like 2 months ago or something like that. I can't remember when. But Chris said, hey, Hudson, I want you to come and help me out with a message. And Chris and Hudson co-taught that message together. So Chris had a part and Hudson had a part, and they were doing that together. So there was a shared teaching component in that. Chris has also given Hudson the opportunity to do our MC welcome and then kind of a drive it home, which is like a close, which is just a short couple of minutes at the beginning and the ending of the service. That is a way that Chris is empowering Hudson, training him up to be a teacher, but doing it where there's a tethered kind of relationship, not, okay, Hudson, you got 25 minutes, here's your message, go. But he's saying, hey, come do this with me. And let's make it a conversation as we co-teach, or here's your one little section, or I want you to tell about your experience with this. So there are a lot of different ways on Sunday morning that you can do that and empower and equip, where it's not just all or nothing, that you're still a part of it, but you're working together as a team. Does that
Okay,
make
now
sense?
that's the willing participant.
Yeah.
What about the unwilling participant?
The unwilling participant that's unwilling to be empowered?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say unwilling, but kind of feel like, you know, it's not my responsibility here to do anything. It's the pastor's responsibility to make this happen.
So, yeah, so I think that what you do in that aspect, you can't make anybody do anything. But what you can do is cast a vision for them and make that reality and that future so inviting that they want to be a part of it. So what you do is you start with the people like Hudson that are willing and eager and ready. And as you visually, as they see you empowering other people and the life and all of that it brings, some of them may never come around, but some of them will begin to come around by looking at the example of what is happening through that empowerment process in other people's lives. I think so often, which we're going to talk about that in this next thing, so often we spend so much time trying to convince people that are never going to be convinced. And we waste our own energy and resources trying to bring everybody along. And we need to be strategic. We need to say, who am I called to invest in right now? And who has God already prepared for that right now? And find that person and then just start. Because once you start and you stop trying to convince the people that may never get there, and expend your energy in the right direction, some of those other people are going to come along. Okay? Which I'll talk about that in a minute. Yes, Lord.
I was just gonna say that. And a thought I had when he asked the question was what we did in the chapel where scriptures were given out
Yes.
to different people to read and things. That's like and she just used the word spark, like a spark.
Yeah,
like that
absolutely.
would spark. So that if they felt like that was, wow, I really loved reading the scripture out loud, that might make something.
Yeah.
An indication to you that this person might be somebody who I could work with because I could tell they really enjoyed doing that.
Yeah, that's good. And if you can shrink the change, so instead of going all in for this, if you give them that tiny little step, here at the chapel we did a staff day away where we had we created an escape room for our staff. I don't know if you remember that, but Christine on our staff, she is the one that she has been to multiple escape rooms. I don't know if you guys are fans of escape rooms, but she is like the master fan. She has, done all these different ones, and she, will be able to rate them in terms of effectiveness and all of this kind of stuff. And so I said, well, Christine, I really would like, and she was new to staff at the time. I said, I'd really like for you to kind of help me with this because I'm in charge of staff days away, but I knew that she was the expert. And she's like, well, okay, but I just don't feel comfortable talking in front of people and that kind of thing. She's very much an introvert. And she was, new to our staff, so she didn't know people very well. And so I said, well, that's fine. Help me get it all set up and all of that. Well, as we were working together on this, she was the expert, not me. She was the one that knew all of the details and everything. And so, right before it was time for us to give the directions and things like that, I was like, well, Christine, would you mind just giving the directions? Oh, man, then I got to talk in front of everybody. And I'm like, well, I tell you what, just explain to them what they need to know when they go in the ring. Okay, I'll do that. Well, she gave the directions. So sometimes you can phrase it in a way that you say, hey, I believe in you. You're the expert. You know what you're doing. And you speak life into them and ability into them that sometimes they don't even know that they have. And then afterwards, she was like, I see what you did there. I'm like, okay. Exactly. Yes.
So are you basically saying that if somebody doesn't see the value of going from, this is a little different question, from doing everything to empowering, then you're trying to talk them into something that they don't see the value in?
Depending on the person. So I think that sometimes they don't know there is a value in that. Sometimes it's ignorance. And when you're able to say, hey, what would it look like if we moved from being a doing kind of group to an empowering group, and then they see the picture of and the benefits of what that looks like, then they might be able to move into it. So I think you have to find, but if they're like, no, I don't care, this is the way I'm going to do it, I see your point, but I don't, this is how I do it. then I think you got to find somebody who is ready to be empowered and move on to that. So I think we have to make sure that we don't assume people are unwilling. We have to make sure that they really see the value in it and see our point and see the benefit of it. And the cost, there's a cost also in all of these if we stay the same. So a lot of times in terms of change and growth, we always identify the cost of the growth, but a lot of times we don't identify, well, what's the cost if we don't change? And which one are we willing to pay? So, and a lot of times we don't ask that question. We don't, because we think personally, well, it doesn't cost me anything. Well, actually it does. It costs you your ability to grow. It costs me my ability to grow. And it costs the mission of the church. That's a pretty big cost. So I think we do need to count the cost of change, but then we also need to count the cost of if we don't change, because there are always costs on both sides. All right, so let me give you guys a little scenario. And Debbie referred to this a little bit. You guys talked about this a little bit in the first session as well. So let's imagine that there's a new product that is on the market, okay? Maybe one that you guys created in one of your fabulous shops, okay? And this is the Smell-O-Vision television, okay? No longer do you have to wonder in a cooking show what that bread smells like. It actually comes to you in your home. You can smell it, okay? No longer do you have to wonder in Swamp People what the swamp smells like. It comes to you in your home, okay? So here's Smell-O-Vision. It's brand new on the market, never been tested, okay? There are 10% of you who would be pioneers that would say, I want it, give it to me now. Like you would sign up for the preview beta version of it, and you're like, I gotta have it, okay? How many of you guys would be the pioneers for Smell-O-Vision? That you're like, I gotta have the new thing. All right, I gotta test it out, gotta try it, okay? Now, the next group of you guys are the progressives, okay? So the progressive group, they're the ones that are thinking, well, you know what? Okay, once it gets live on the market, I'm gonna kind of see what happens, and then I'm gonna be one of the first people to get it, okay? When it hits Walmart and it's been on the shelves and that kind of thing, I'm not getting it straight from the factory, but I'm gonna, you know, pretty soon into this, move toward adopting Smell-O-Vision in my house. So how many of you guys would say that you're the next wave, kind of the progressive group, okay? Then you have the participants. All right, now the participants, those are the group that they say, well, you know what? I'm gonna wait until they make an off-brand that's a little bit cheaper. Amen. I'm gonna wait until I see how much all these other people have enjoyed it, and then I'll do it, okay? So how many of you guys say, you know, it's gonna be a significant amount of time, I'm not getting it right off the bat, but I'll go for it a year down the road or a little bit of time after I see how everybody else is liking it. How many of you guys would be the participants?
I'm almost ready to go again.
What she said, there's people like Diane that are just gonna wait till the next thing comes out. Okay, how many of you guys are the dissenters that you're like, you still have the TV that you have to get up and change the channel and it goes click, click, click on the knob, right? So how many of you guys would be the dissenters? You're not going for the Smell-O-Vision, okay? You
Just
got
for
a
the
few?
Smell-O-Vision.
Okay, all right, just for the Smell-O-Vision.
Yeah, I mean, I just.
Here's my question for you guys. Yes, that is Smell-O-Vision. Yes, that is gadgets and technology. But the same thing happens anytime you try something new in your church, okay? There are gonna be 10% of the people that are gonna be like, I'm all in, I'm right here with you, let's go do this thing together. Then there are gonna be the progressives that are like, you know what, you guys get it started, but right after I see that you guys are making it work, I'm all in. Then you're gonna have the participants that are like, I'm gonna watch you guys. I'm gonna see if this actually works. I'm gonna see if you follow through and do what you say you're gonna do. And once you do, then I'm gonna be all in. Now, here's the group that actually gets most of our discussion and most of our attention, the dissenters. There are 10% of your people that are never gonna do it. Where do you spend your time?
Right here.
Trying to convince them.
So where do you spend your time? A lot of us end up spending our time with 10% of the people that are never going to do, they're never going to do it. But if we were strategic, where should we spend our time? If you guys were the corporate headquarters of Smell-O-Vision, where would you guys spend your time? So in your notebook, you actually have a couple of questions. One of the questions says, in which group of people would it be wise for the Smell-O-Vision company to put its efforts in marketing and sales? Okay, I want you guys to think about that. Which of these groups of people, if they could only choose one of these groups of people, which one? And then does it make sense to invest significant effort in trying to convince the dissenters to buy their product? If you were the Smell-O-Vision company, how would you roll out your new product and lead this change? And how does this apply to the way we must lead change in the church? You guys talk about that with the people at your table. Smell-O-Vision.
I'll try. I used to serve in everything, but I'm going to take the kids. I read it. That doesn't go over too Yeah, but this is to do marketing and sales, like you get them started, so you would not spend your marketing sales.
I look at our marketing.
Yeah, but you don't know what the rest are. They are watching. Sure. You don't want yeah, but you are Smell-O-Vision.
I understand it, but I'm talking about it.
I'm not saying I don't spend any.
Really.
And so.
I would agree with that.
That's what's
They're waiting to see.
It could be just struggling to articulate, but that's the whole thing is about here.
Yeah, I'm not working. I'm talking about progressive. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's why I
I'm
say.
They're gonna be the ones that will go right in, with television.
All right, we're gonna start back with Debbie's session in 2 minutes, so if you guys need to get coffee, break, whatever, 2 minutes, we're gonna come back together. You know, what our
There was a girl laying on the bed watching her music video. I'll never forget it. Which is probably the same thing. I don't. I have one. I'll be there, so I'll tell Siri. Siri.
Oh, yeah.
That's why.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
I did. I
I know, right? Exactly.
Did you say you were from Columbus? Annual conference, Columbus?
Yeah, I'm thinking about trying to go.
Be up there?
I had big goals. The bad thing about us is small church.
they're not hard.
Like that, we can't do it. You can tell, hurt the church, church, you know, goes small. They can't afford to pay a regular pastor. So they get a light pastor. And, you know, they take away more of their votes. So church do vote most of the time. See Saturday. Or now, they can't.
My husband grew up on the other side of the state.
They gotta do it all.
I'll tell you what, that
Like, you know, so after all right, you guys ready? I got us a little bit far behind, so we're gonna get one out.
We're excited about all that.
Yeah, I don't know.
When I was there,
That fiddle player, he would stand outside and play, and then get up on the stage. Most of the girls, that fiddle
All right, you guys ready? All right, Debbie, they're all yours.
Okay. I want to share something with you real briefly as we get started. Adults have a process mentally that they go through when they're changing. The first step is awareness. I call it ACA. Awareness. If you don't know that you need to change, why would you change? So the first step is you have to become aware that you need to change. Then, doesn't mean you're going to change. Just because I'm aware that my husband wants me to quit buying new clothes doesn't mean I'm going to quit buying new clothes. But if he shows me our financial statement, I begin to understand why he doesn't want me to buy any more new clothes, because there's no more money. We're retired now. So I'm not going to stop buying clothes just because he told me I needed to. I have to understand that there's a real good reason why he told me that. Sometimes the reasons aren't so good, and I just say, but if he can give me a good understanding, I won't buy any more new clothes. But that doesn't mean that when I'm at Belk's this afternoon and see something I really like, I'm committed to not buying it. I may still buy it and then have to explain myself later, or, beg for forgiveness. Then I will decide going forward whether I will take action and not buy any more clothes, or whether I will accept that I just don't need any more clothes, or whether I'll see if I can get a friend to trade clothes with me. There's all sorts of ways that we can do this. Be aware that people go through this process of awareness, understanding, commitment, and action. When you first start trying to empower somebody, empower them to step up and be the laity that God wants them to be, they're not going to automatically believe you. But if you're sharing and helping them understand why this is important, the purpose for it, then they may buy in and commit to it and do it. Just be aware. This is a time-based process. This doesn't all happen in 15 minutes of a conversation with you. Sometimes it happens over time. Sometimes it doesn't happen at all. And we'll be talking about that as we go on through the day. We're going to talk right now about transformational ministry planning, because you can need to change and want to change and be aware you need to change and understand. You've got to have information about how to understand where you need to go. How does God help us to discern where He's trying to take us? What do we do? How does God talk to us? Prayer. Through prayer, obviously, that's the biggie. Other people, through events, through things like this. There are all sorts of ways that a leader discerns where God is trying to take a church. But there's a lot of information gathering and planning that goes into that process, because we can be aware we need to change, but we have to have a really good understanding of what we're changing to, because you don't change just for the sake of change. There's always a reason. Why did God take the Israelites away from the Egyptians and they wound up lying in the desert for 40-something years? Because what? He wanted the people. He wanted the people. And so there was a purpose. So you got to figure out what the purpose is, and that's part of understanding and awareness. So how does a leader know? Well, there's a process that goes with that, and I want to share that process with you. Just, you've got a page in your workbook that responds to that, and it's got these things that we're going to be looking at. It's like some of you, if you've worked in manufacturing, the Japanese have a word for it. It's called Kaizen. Does anybody recognize that? What does that mean?
Continuous improvement.
Continuous improvement. Continuous improvement means that things are continually moving in this circle. This is what's happening as you move into transformational planning for your church. This is assessing. Assessing is the first step. What's the second step? You've got them there in front of you. You don't have them on that sheet? Okay. There's a sheet.
In order, like 1 through 6, instead of in the circle.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I put it in a circle because Kaizen is continuously, because this is what happens. You've assessed that the church needs to change. You have discerned where God wants you to go. You've strategically planned the best way to do that. You have identified how you're going to implement, and you've got your steps of the things you need to do. You're implementing, and once you've implemented, you evaluate what you've done so that you can what? What's the next step?
We actually don't.
We don't, I think that you get a little bit of.
Okay, that's all right. I'm sorry. You've got specific steps that are going to apply to this.
Assessing, what's this?
Assessing, you're going to discern where you need to go. You're going to strategically plan how you're going to do that with these steps we're fixing to talk about.
Debbie, is that on one of the handouts that you gave me? Or is
No.
that with?
No, the last process is on one of the handouts, the communication handout.
Implement, and what's the
We have,
last one?
in the handouts that you gave me are at the
Evaluate.
table, so if you have those handouts,
Wait a second, I'm getting back here. This is, we're going to be talking about 6 steps, and you've got some index cards on the table. I want you to each get 6 cards, because as we go through these 6 steps, it will correlate to the workbook where you've got external assessment. That's number 1. Number 2 is internal assessment. This is number 3 is analyzing the data, drawing conclusions is 4. 5 is defining value, and 6 is setting goals. That is really this process. This is what the leader is doing. The leader and the team, or whoever the leaders of the church he's working with, assess, they discern, they strategically plan, they implement, and they evaluate. And then once they put that change into place, they'll become aware they need to do something differently. So they'll then begin to assess what they need to do differently, discern if that's what God wants from them, strategically plan how to implement, and evaluate. I call it plan, do, check, and act. Plan, do, check, and act. It's a process. It's never going to stop, because once you start changing, you're going to have to change again. You can't stay. It's just like I didn't drive a horse here today. I drove my car. Everybody's got how, you may keep your car 2 years. You may keep yours 10 years. Some people may only keep one, may just lease one and change it every year. Everybody's got a different way of doing it, but we're all doing this process. And as leaders in your church, as a CLM, you will engage in this process with your pastor, or if you're the pastor, with your church council, or your administrative board, or whatever you call the people who are responsible for assessing where you're going as a church, what you're doing as a church, discerning where God wants you to go as a church, strategically planning how you're going to do it, making it happen. And then once you do that, if you don't evaluate, did this work well? What could we have done differently? If we could do this again, what would we do differently next time? What would we not do? If you don't do all those things, how do you keep from making the same mistakes over and over and over again? So you really have to do this. So we're going to talk about those 6 steps, because you're going to be looking over the next several months or years or however long you're going to take for the process at what it is that God is wanting your church to do. If you want to move from a pastoral church to a corporate church or a program church or whatever, you've got to assess how you do that. Yes, question back.
What is the difference in that more simplified model of plan, do, check, act? What's the difference between do and act in those 4?
Do is more the implementing
Uh-huh.
and acting, and the evaluation is the check. You always want to check.
Reevaluate.
You always want to see if what we did worked or didn't work, because if you don't, you got to find out. You know, we decided we would change X, Y, Z, and then we planned to change X, Y, Z, and then we changed X, Y, Z, and half the church tried to leave because they were very unhappy about it. So going forward, what do we need to do? And what would we not do again? I mean, there's just, again, it's just a process, and you can call it whatever you want to, as long as you follow and do the things. It's not that big a thing. It sort of happens. If you look at what you're doing in your churches now, you're doing these steps. Somebody's saying, you know, how are we going to do something? And somebody's saying, well, you know, we could do this, this, or this. And somebody else says, no, we don't need to do that. You're always assessing. But we've got a process for you if you want to change, if you want to grow, to accomplish this. The first one is an external assessment. That's step 1. So if you've got your cards, as we go through the steps, write the step number and the name on the card. And then when we get through talking about it a little bit, we'll write some action steps on the back and some examples of how you can do that. The external assessment, and that can be as huge or as small as you want it to be, depending on what your situation is. Collecting community demographic information. If you're a family church, I don't know how many other family churches there are in the area. I don't know if you understand about what's going on in your neighborhood. If you understand what's going on in your church, outside your church, with the leadership of your town or community, you may want to do some, there are all kinds of demographic software things out there that can tell you in your county or in your area of the county how many people there are, how many people with children, how many households, and all those different things. If you have got surveys, interviews, if you want to talk to a couple of people on your town council, this is external, remember, outside your church. You might want to ask people, what do people think about us when they hear our name? Do you know that? Have you ever asked anybody, maybe in the neighborhoods around your church or in the Rotary Club or the Lions Club or the PTA, what do they think about ABC Church? What's their opinion? That's an external assessment, if you will. Learn about the population in the neighborhoods, discover the lifestyle. This is really important. The felt needs. If your target people that you want to join your church are unchurched, they will have different felt needs of what they're looking for in an organization that they want to be a part of than someone who has been going to church all their life. What are they needing? Somebody who's been a part of the church their whole life sort of has expectations for a church. Someone who's never been to church at all may have more bad feelings about a church than people who've been in church all their lives. Again, you've got to do assessments, learn about the population, learn about the lifestyle, the felt needs, and the hopes. What do people hope church will do in the community? And you can find this out from asking people, what do y'all hope we're going to do? Is it that we do an Easter egg hunt once a year and that's what you're expecting from us? Is it that when people are sick, we come alongside and visit and help and support the caregivers? I mean, what is it that you're expecting us to do? If you ask people outside your church how your church is perceived, when you hear our name, what do you think? You will learn a lot more about your church. So that is one way of assessing, external assessment. So right on the back of your card for external assessments, what are some things that you think might work for doing an external assessment for your church? Is it community leaders? Is it clubs in the community? Is it other groups in the community? What about other churches? Sometimes it's interesting to find out what other churches think of your group. Okay, after you've done that, we'll look at the next step would be after you've done an external assessment. I think one of the interesting things is if I did an external assessment and asked people what they thought of my church, I would be interested in sharing with the leaders of my church what people told me. Because everybody, has got a very different feel for what they think about their church than what people who've never darkened the door have. And some churches are used like a community center. I know our church is at a crossroads in Savannah, and we've got people meeting there every single day. And most of them are not members. And to my knowledge, we've never gotten any feedback from them on what they think about our church. I think that would be a great opportunity to just give the leaders of those groups. We've got homeschool groups, we've got AA groups, we've got other denomination groups, and ask them what they think about our church. That would be something good to know. So then I could share that with my internal people and then ask them, how do you feel about that? About what they said. What do you think? When you think the name of our church, what do you think? A place to get married? My Sunday school class, Wednesday night suppers, because that's one night I won't have to cook. What is it? When you start doing all this, you begin to see what people are expecting from your church. You can get the internal demographic information and compare it to the external demographic information. If you've got a 5-mile radius around your church, 1,000 families that have children in elementary school, and you've only got 12 kids in your children's Sunday school classes that are elementary age, that tells you something, doesn't it? So when you do this internal assessment, you can do surveys of your congregation, and you don't have to make this a big formal thing. You can have a Wednesday night supper or have a potluck and divide people up into groups the size of your table here and ask them. Talk at your table and decide, what do you think about our church? Do you think we're welcoming? Do you think we're not so welcoming? Do you think we are a church that likes children or a church that would rather not have them crying in the service while the preacher's preaching? What do you think? It's easy to do. You don't have to do a formal, 40-page survey. Ask people in your church. An internal assessment is every bit as important as an external assessment. And then because you need to compare the differences, and some of you may have already done this, this is something that's a lot. Now, write down the 2 things you're going to do in your church to collect internal information on what people, what they think about the church. Is it good? What you might even ask them if they think they're a family church. Because even big churches with thousands of members have groups in them that are family. My husband and I have a Sunday school class that's 60 people. Couples, widows, divorced folks, and we've been together, most of us, for about 25 or 30 years. And they're family. when I'm hurting, I want them to come alongside. So even in a larger church, you can have family groups. Yes, ma'am.
So, can you expand on, for example, in the external assessment, collecting a community demographic? So in this case, X percentage of the population are drug addicts. Okay, so then, and then we're looking for the felt needs. So the other people in the community are like, we need protection, these people need help directly, but we need help being protected from them. So then how do you share that external information with that example? And then like, what would be the thought or the feeling that you're probing for?
Well, I would use it to go along and share with the group that you decide you want to share with, to ask them for feedback on what they think about, what the members think about your church. Some people do that with a written survey. Other people do it both with a written survey and with a verbal survey, talking about at a family night supper, or having 4 people. If you've got maybe you've got 100 at family night supper and you don't want to do it with small table groups because it's hard to get all the information out. Maybe you might want to have 4 leaders up front and you ask them questions and have them give their opinion and ask everybody out there in the group, how many of you agree with that? Because it's not about agreeing or disagreeing. It's really about finding out what people think. It's just any kind of internal. And if you've already got an idea that maybe you want to reach out to the unchurched, or you want to reach out to the homeless, or you want to reach out to the people with drug problems, or whatever you've already got an idea. You know where God's leading you. We started a program at White Bluff called Everybody Eats Fresh Fruit. And we do that once a month. And we went around and got donations from people. And so people who don't have enough to eat, they know we advertise this and they can come to the church and they leave with big baskets of food, fresh food. It's vegetables and fruits and breads, fresh breads. And the people from our church are there to meet them, to see if there are other things that we can do to help them. It's just, there were some people in our church that had a desire that they wanted to help people. And the one girl that did it just sort of put it all together, and it's grown by leaps and bounds. And now there's 15 or 20 people from our church there, with 30 or 40 or 50 people coming in there to get food. So you have to decide what you're aiming for. And once you do that, then you can decide what kind of information you need to collect to see how you would go about doing that. We had another girl who felt a real burden from the Lord to do what we could for homeless veterans. And once a month, she got this program going. And once a month, we have homeless veterans. And now we've even got homeless women veterans coming. And we provide food, clothing, educational assistance if we can. We just have a number of people there who serve as resources to talk to them. Some of them just need somebody to talk to.
Okay,
so that's the way you use that to gauge. When she was doing that, she got external and internal feedback on would there be people here who would be interested in that, who are passionate about that? Is that something I feel the Lord leading me to do it. Would any of you be interested to help me? Is this something you feel passionate about? Because people who are not interested in doing that aren't going to do a very good job with it.
Okay.
Because you can't have in a congregation with 350 there on Sunday morning, you can't have 350 people doing that thing.
Right.
And you got people who will lead it that feel passionate about it. But you have to give information. And then you have to analyze the data. And that's the next step. But before we go to that one, I want you to write down on your internal assessment, what are a couple of things you would do to collect your internal information. If you've already got that, we'll move on to the next, which would be analyze the data. And I'm sorry I went on to that without asking you if I had answered your question.
Oh, I was just wondering if it's like exactly the same kind of survey, but it's not. The external data gives you the perceived needs and you through polls and that kind of thing, but then, so once you identify your passion, your internal assessment is really finding out how
Can you
people
meet that
feel
need?
about, yeah.
Do you have people,
Right.
if you decide that you want to do this thing with the homeless veterans, say,
Mhm.
and nobody there is a veteran? I mean, because oddly enough, we're in a situation where it's been a number of years before we had anything but a sign-up army.
Right.
You know, back in the 60s, we had a draft and all that went away. And up until then, every male served in the military. Now, we have only a very small percentage of the country that serves in the military. Praise God for them, but we don't have but a small percentage. So you may not have in some churches much interest. If you have an older church, you've got a lot of veterans, people who served in Vietnam. We still have World War II veterans around, some of them. So you might have a lot of passion. You might have this girl at White Bluff, her daddy was a World War II veteran, and he died 10 or so years ago, and she's just felt a leading from the Lord. Again, that's the way that a leader discerns. If you've got some interest, whether it's just one person or it's a Sunday school class or the women's group or men's group or a small Bible study group, that pretty much all of them, not everybody, but a good number of them are real passionate about one thing. That's another possibility. You know, you have a lot of United Methodist women are passionate about helping with Dash Tower or about helping Safe Shelter in Savannah gets a lot of support. They're the domestic violence shelter in Savannah from certain groups in our church that feel passionate about it. But when you're looking for what you want to do, if you want to meet the needs of the community, you got to find out what they are. And some of them are perceived and some of them are real, depending on who you're dealing with. And within your church, what you may find is there's not a real need for some of the things people are passionate about, but mostly people will figure out a way to fulfill that passion in themselves. But you need to know in your church what people are passionate about. You may want to do something that nobody else in the church wants to do. If you're a leader, would you be spinning your wheels to try to get people to do something they're not interested in doing? Why would you waste your time? It's a little bit like going back to what Ann shared with us about the 10% dissenters. If you spend all your time dealing with them, you're not going to find these 10% that want to do it. And that are early adapters, people that'll go get a smartphone before anybody else has one. You got to find those people and work with them. And then you got to analyze the data. If you look at the external survey, and like I said, suppose you've got 1,000 families within 5 miles of your church that have children. What are they looking for from church for their children? Some of them may be looking for something and they're driving 40 miles to a church because they're not getting it in the neighborhood. You know, you have to decide what works for you. What would you do if your church is answering the needs and concerns in the community? How would you relate that in a way that they would maybe decide to come and visit your church on Sunday morning or Saturday night or whenever you meet? One of the ways that someone who was working with us at White Bluff told us to do that was they said, when these outside people come in to use your building, which you so graciously offer to everybody 7 days a week, except it's our time on Sunday, it's busy there, but he said, why don't you give them water with your church name on it? You know, put your church name on there, put the website, put the phone number, and just give out water to the groups that come. Most of them have to come in and have someone, if they need that kind of stuff, they have it catered, or they buy it themselves and schlep it in from their car to put out for their group. Why don't y'all do that? That's a way that you can say, you know what, we let you use the building, why don't you come see what we're up to on Sunday? We have 2 different churches meeting on our location, so we can do that in a lot of different ways. There are all sorts of things that will come up, but they are specific to your location. What works for you won't work for her church or his church. It's got to be what works for you. So after you've assessed externally and you've assessed internally, then you need to look at that information. Look at that information. What is this telling you? Have other leaders in your church sit down with you at a table like you're sitting at today and look at this information and say, what is this telling us that we've got 1,000 families with elementary children and we have 12 kids in our Sunday school group? What is that telling us? If it's telling us something, what do we need to do about it? Are we passionate enough to have people that would do it? And how do we do it? And if you decide, yeah, we're passionate enough about it and we have 3 or 4 people we think would really work hard, then you come up with strategies for how you can do this. What can we do? Do we want 500 more people, or would we think that success was 50 people? If we could get 50 more people with kids to come and be a part of our church because we were meeting their needs. That's not our need, it's their need. Again, you're looking for the external needs. And then you look at your internal wants and needs, put them together, analyze them, and then you plan strategically. When you analyze the data, I want you to take, if you've got to analyze the data, that's step 3. On the back, put down 2 things you would like to learn from the data you collect. Because if there's 2 things you want to know, decide what they are. What do I want to know? Both from the internal and the external data. And when you've got that information together, put it all on a sheet of paper, sit your team down at the table and say, okay, what's this saying to them? Do we need to do more outreach in our community? How are we going to do that? What can we do that would, can we hold a barbecue and invite all the people that live within 6 blocks of my church? And just say, we just want you to come, we just want to meet you. And then have them fill out a sheet of paper before they leave or an index card. Is there anything that you're looking for from a church that we might be able to provide? You're not promising to provide it. Ask them. Some smaller churches are great at that. Some larger churches are great at that. Bringing people in, health fairs. My mama is in an assisted living program, and she went to a health fair yesterday that another place like hers held. And they took them all over there. Mom called me last night. She said, I'm thinking about moving. I said, why are you thinking about moving? She said, I like those people over there. And they took my blood pressure and they gave me a little basket of treats and they told me about all their activities. And I don't know, I might want to move. You never know what's going to attract somebody to your church. You got to try a lot of different things. So you've looked and you're analyzing your data. And you've written down a couple of things that you want to know from the data. This is internal and external. A lot of times what you assume is not necessarily so. We all assume things and we don't necessarily know. So the next thing we got to do, we've looked at the data, we've analyzed the data, we've got to make conclusions. What is this telling us? Again, asking your people what they're passionate about. Find out what the conclusions. Who are you called to be as a church? You should be able to answer those questions. And maybe when you have your administrative board session, you start out one session or your council meets once a month, and you start out and you just take 5 minutes after the opening devotional and prayer. And you say, okay, who is this church called to be? God's people in the world. Well, let's get more specific than that. Who are we called to be? And who are we called to be that to? Ask that question. How are you called to reach people? Is it on the internet? Is it face to face? Is it standing in the parking lot at Kmart? How are we called to reach people? How are we? What are our spiritual gifts? How are we uniquely qualified to do that? Sometimes we try to do stuff that we don't have the gift to do. When at White Bluff, we started looking at, we had this big facility and we were a much older church. We really wanted to reach the unchurched. But we had all been going to church for 70 years. Nobody who was unchurched wants to come and spend time in church with us because they think we already know it all. They wanted to go somewhere they were more comfortable. So we started analyzing this and we said, look, we aren't young. A lot of unchurched people, and when you look at the demographics in the neighborhood around our church, people are younger, but we're older. They don't want to come be with their mom and the daddy. They want to be with people their age. But we didn't have a lot of people their age, and they were not really passionately committed to the outreach of the unchurched. So we said, okay, who in South Georgia reaches out to the unchurched and does it well? And we said, okay, Gateway does that. And they're on the other side of town. And that's when we decided that we would let Gateway create a church on our premises. We divided the church down the middle on Sundays, and they meet at 11 o'clock for their morning worship service. We meet at 9:30 for ours, and our Sunday school meets at 11, but only about a third of our people go to Sunday school. So we just took one wing for us, and they took one wing for them, and they took the gym, and we took the sanctuary, and we divided the parking spaces, and that's how we did it. And because we wanted to reach the unchurched, we said, we can't really do that well. So we will fail. Why not get somebody? This was the drawing conclusions part. Why not get somebody who does this well and see if they want to partner with us, and they'll do it. We just let them use our facility because we got it. It's empty. What's God going to say to me when I get to heaven? And I say, well, we had this great, we had 15 Sunday school rooms and a whole gymnasium. We didn't use it though. You know, we built it. We paid a lot of money for it, but we didn't use it. We could. We used it every day for people out in the community, but we didn't use it for you, Lord. We really felt that that was what we needed to do. So drawing conclusions is important because that becomes the reason you're doing this and the purpose. The reason for this is very important. You'll see that later on. I want you to write on your card, number 4, draw conclusions. And on the back of that card, I want you to write one way or one area that God is moving your community to take some action in. What's the way? And write down a way that you are uniquely gifted and equipped. Or maybe it's your church that's uniquely gifted and equipped. If you're real good at hospitality, or you're really good at the worship service, you got to find if there's a need for that so that you can share it. Being uniquely gifted, and that's something I don't think we put enough emphasis on. What are our spiritual gifts? Because God has given us that gift to use for His glory and for bringing disciples into His church. But if everybody's not using their spiritual gifts, whatever that gift is, it won't be as dynamic and it won't be strategic. So you've implemented, you've drawn conclusions, you've written a way that God is moving in your community and how you are uniquely gifted. Then you need to define your values. And some of you have already done that. You talked about values of your church earlier. But you do need to find out. And again, this is a tabletop discussion at your family night supper or covered dish. Or if you have bigger groups, you can get a Sunday school class together for a covered dish. And if you are the lay minister or you're the local pastor, you're the pastor of the church, you can just ask this Sunday school group, what do you value? What are the values of this church to you? Everybody's going to have different ideas, but you need to ask about philosophies, values, and beliefs that guide the ministries of this church. Is it making disciples? Is it providing a great Sunday school program that will lead people down the road of faith? What is it? And what is the foundation upon which you want to build a culture and change the DNA of your congregation? If you want them to be more focused on Scripture and how you live out Scripture in the world, then you've got to figure out what are the values that go along with that, and what do our values say we need to be working on. I want you to write down, define values, number 5, and put 2 core values or philosophies that you feel guide your ministry. Or if you don't know those 2 philosophies and values, what are the 2 philosophies and values you wish would guide your ministry? Because then you might be able to create a plan for making that happen. And the last step is step 6, and that is set goals. Determine where you want to see yourself in the future and set a goal and put a date on it. By 2021, I want us to have 100 more members in our church, or 10 more members in our church, or 50 more people in our Sunday school program, or 50 more people, or 10 people in our youth program, or I want us to have a full-time paid youth pastor, or I want us to have whatever it is in your church that they need to have goals. What are these goals? If you've isolated a ministry to the community, whether it's working, providing a space for AA groups to meet, or whether it's doing something for the homeless, whatever it is, you need then to develop a plan to achieve that goal. What would it take? And this is really communication, y'all. Communication is critical. When things are changing, communication tanks. People get so busy worrying about what's changing that they're not happy about, or that they're really excited about, that they quit sharing. And these teams that are meeting, you need to publish this information somehow. You need to share with the whole congregation. If you get together and meet with a Sunday school class and they share what their values are, when you meet with the next group, maybe it's the UMW, or maybe it's the choir, or maybe it's another Sunday school class, or all the teachers that teach youth Sunday school, or all the teachers that teach children's Sunday school, or all the teachers that teach adult Sunday school. Say, you know what, when we met with the ABC Sunday school class, this is what they said after they've told you what their values are. Then you say, let me share with you what the ABC Sunday school thought it was. And maybe some of theirs are the same as ours, and maybe some of them aren't. That tells you something. Communication is critical, and we're going to talk about communication. But setting the goals, maybe one of the goals needs to be, we will improve our communication by 2020. So that anybody in this church that we ask, why does this church exist? Why are we here? What are we about? Can tell you. Maybe that's a conversation, and we'll be talking about critical conversations at lunchtime or right after. And that's going to be important, because once you have identified and determined what the values are, developed a plan that will help you accomplish that goal, then you can do it. But you will have to have critical conversations to make that happen. So on number 6, write down a potential goal for growth and health with 2 practical steps. What is your goal for growth and health, and 2 practical steps that will move you forward? It may not get you there. It may be a temporary solution. Sometimes when things are changing, you need to use temporary solutions. We aren't going to do this for 9 years, but we're going to do it for 9 months, because it'll get us. That little thing in your car that looks like a donut when you have a flat tire? There's no tire anymore in the car, all of them. You got this temporary tire, and it's really not there to drive 1,000 miles or even 100 miles. It's there to get you to the Goodyear store so you can get another tire. It's temporary, but it gets you to the Goodyear store to get another tire. You may find a temporary solution at your church that will work for you for 6 months. And then you have to go through the whole process again to do something different. But that's your goals, and you've set a potential for goal of growth, and you've written 2 practical steps that will move you forward to accomplish that goal. And I don't know how far over time, because I can't find my watch. It's on the wrong arm. It's turning around, and okay. So
it's a demographic study tool. We should all be using that tool. I would love to see you guys take advantage of that. The website is missioninsight.com. You have to get with your district and get all the login information and all of that kind of stuff. Because what you do as a part of this tool is you upload basically your database of all of the information from your people that attend your church, and they will spit out all of these reports that will give you demographic information from an internal perspective as well as an external perspective of your community. So you can see how your church's demographic compares with your community's demographic and where you might be missing the mark. And really learn a whole lot about your church and your community from that. So I hope that you guys will be able to utilize that, because that is a really great tool, really good tool. Mission Insight, it's mission and then INSITE.com. But you'll have to get all of the login information and all of that from your DS or, I don't know, from somebody else. That's all. All right, communication style assessment. What I would like for you guys to do, lunch is here, so this is gonna help you guys be really, really speedy in this next process, because you're gonna begin to smell cheese dip and you're gonna be like, oh, okay, let's move forward. But what I'd like for you guys to do is, in your notebook, you guys have a communication style assessment. And I'm going to give you guys 10 minutes to complete that assessment, because here's the thing. Most of the time, we communicate in the way that we listen, that we receive information the best, okay? So if I am an idea person, then I'm going to communicate ideas. But if you're more of a process kind of person, you're not really understanding all my ideas. You're listening for systems and processes. And if I'm not communicating that to you, then you're just basically having a hard time understanding what I'm saying. As leaders, we need to be aware of how we are created to communicate with other people. And we need to know that when we're communicating to a large group of people, that I'm communicating to people that speak process, they hear processes and are looking for processes. I'm communicating with people who are looking for ideas. I'm communicating with people who are like, hey, let's make sure that we're all together and all the people are in the same room and everybody's feeling good about stuff. And I'm communicating with people that are like, hey, give me the bullet points. I don't want to know all the rest of it. Give me the bullet points. So what we're going to do in this time is I'll give you guys 10 minutes to take that assessment. The way that the assessment works is that you've got a list of questions that are grouped together in pairs, okay? And so like the first one is, I like action, I deal with problems in a systematic way. Okay, both of those things may be true for you, but which one is your primary way of feeling or dealing with stuff, okay? So if you had to rank these, which one would be like closer to being a 10, yes, this is all me, than the other one, okay? So it's not, these are not pairs of opposites where I like salt or I like pepper, okay? It's not that. It's of those two things, which one is most true for you most of the time? And then what you're going to do is choose that option, and a couple of pages later, there's a record-keeping sheet, okay? Right here, scoring sheet for communication style assessment. Then what you're going to do is, if you say, hey, I really like action, which that would be the one that I would circle in at, then I'm going to come over here on this assessment sheet, and I'm going to circle the number 1, because that was the one that I would have chosen of the 1 or the 2. I'm not going to circle the 2, I'm just going to circle the 1, okay? So go through and see if you guys can identify which is your style, and then once you're done, you can go get your lunch. How about that? So everybody move through, and then you know what? Let's pray and bless the food right now, and then we'll get the blessing out of the way too. All right, let's pray. Dear Lord Jesus, thank you for bringing us here today. Thank you for my friends. Thank you for their willingness and their hunger to grow deeper in their relationship, God, and learn more about the way that you are calling each of us to lead. I ask that you will bless this food to our bodies. In your name I pray, amen. All right, so do your assessment and then go eat your food. And then remember during lunch, if you have something that you want to, that you're willing to say on that video, come and get me, and Chris and Josh will be over there in the ministry offices.
Oh, that's my weakest one. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I like
I can't hold it. If I'm getting anything, I can hold it. Thank you, sir.
Anything but one. Yeah.
Man, swings and riding down.
That's 12 hours ago.
What do you do? Yes, they're all. What were you? I kept giving three. Wonderful. Right, because it really doesn't always the answer. Yeah, I was like, every time I do about it. I can't be everything, you know? Hey, if any of you guys want to do the filming first before you eat, I'll take you guys over there if you want to walk over there. So we can try to get you guys all in. Thank you. Oh my goodness. All right, who's going first? Anybody else? Walk over to the place. I love these burrito with chips and salsa. That's right.
have looked them all up. I think they're all the same. This is salsa, and inside there is a little thing. It tastes like cheese sauce. Yeah, I think
Hey, right, I was gonna say, damn, girl, you're working it, because when she came in, I was bad, it's bad. So now there. There is. But mine are all from 13, 8, 11.
Yeah.
17. No, mine are like those.
And then my third one was 1.52 high. So I'm really like,
Which one was it, one's it tied?
1 and 3 tied, and those were both 13, and number 4 was 12. So that's like how
That happens to me. That's how it happens to me all the time too. I get so aggravated with these kind of tests. I'm like, I can't be everything. And I always score like so evenly. Like, I just want to know the answer. I'll take some cake though. We got cake over here.
it's not possible.
We don't want it. Yeah, I understand. I didn't come in mine. I'm like.
And don't want to. They don't want to because a lot of not necessarily work about it. Don't feel like that.
So the rest of them
I know, I've been this morning.
don't have and, all things that this is, and Patrick said, dinner, or he added right. And the big things get.
Kim.
Okay. I'll tell her. Just hold it down.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's okay. Just- yeah.
Sorry. Were you gonna tell us video?
That might solve my problem. So the other part of it, with their care, how they.
Mike, your table left you.
So what I want to do.
It's Christmas.
I know.